Right before my father's retirement party, his office manager pulled me aside in the parking lot and said, quietly, without looking at me, "Don't go home after this. Come back here at 9. There's something you need to see." I almost laughed. Janet had worked for my father for 16 years. She'd send me birthday cards every year until I turned 25. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't the type to whisper in parking lots. So I listened. "My name is Elaine." "Wait, I go by Ellie. My father has called me Ellie since I was 4 years old, and somewhere along the way it stopped being a nickname and started being the whole of who I was to him. Ellie, the responsible one. Ellie, who took out a personal loan when the business had a bad quarter in 2019. Ellie, who flew home 3 times in one year when my mother was sick, managing insurance claims and specialist appointments while still hitting her numbers at work. Ellie, who co-signed the lease on the new office space because the bank wanted a second guarantor and my father's credit was still rebuilding from a bad investment. I was 31 years old and I had never once asked for anything back. That was the part that made it so easy for them. The retirement party was beautiful. Rented event space downtown, 60 guests, open bar, a slideshow my younger brother put together with photos from across my father's 40-year career. My father cried during the toast. I cried a little too, standing near the back holding a glass of champagne I'd barely touched. My brother stood up front with his wife, right next to my father, and I remember thinking how natural they looked together. Like a unit, like a family portrait where someone had been cropped out just slightly. I drove home after. I sat in my apartment for an hour, changed out of my dress, then drove back. Janet was waiting in the parking lot with her coat still on and her keys in her hand. She looked like someone who had already decided this was the right thing to do and was now second-guessing herself every 30 seconds. "I don't want to get in the middle of this," she said first. "Okay," I said. "But I've watched you for 16 years, and what they're doing." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Come inside." She had a key. She led us into the office, turned on the desk lamp in the back conference room instead of the overheads, and set a folder on the table. "Your father asked me to file these last week," she said. "I made a copy before I did." I sat down. I opened the folder. It took me about 4 minutes to understand what I was reading. Then it took another 10 for my hands to stop shaking enough that I could turn the pages. 3 months earlier, my father had restructured the ownership of the business. The LLC that I had co-signed the lease for. The same business I had injected money into during the bad quarter. The restructuring transferred controlling interests to my brother, not split between us, not revised to reflect what I had contributed, just transferred entirely, with a buyout valuation that had been set before the property value of the office building had appreciated, meaning my stake, if it was even acknowledged at all, had been calculated at roughly a third of what it was actually worth now. And at the bottom of the final page there was my signature, on a document I had signed 8 months ago. My brother had handed it to me over dinner. He said it was a formality, something about updating the operating agreement for tax purposes. He was calm. He explained it well. He worked in finance, or at least he said he did, moving between roles often enough that I could never fully track what he actually did. I had skimmed it. I had trusted him. I had signed. I sat in that conference room under the desk lamp for a long time. Janet made coffee. She didn't say anything. She just set a mug next to my elbow and sat across from me and let me read. "How long have you known?" I finally asked. "I suspected something was off when he asked me to backdate the filing confirmation," she said. "I didn't do it. I told him the system didn't allow it, but that was when I knew." I nodded. I kept looking at the paper. "Your brother has been in the office more than usual," she added. "He and your father have had a lot of closed-door meetings. Your sister-in-law, too, sometimes." My sister-in-law. I had helped pay for part of their wedding, not because anyone asked exactly, but because my father had mentioned, carefully, that they were a little stretched and wouldn't it be nice if the family contributed, and I was doing so well. I had written a check for $4,000 and felt good about it. I drove home again at midnight. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and every document I had ever signed for that business laid out around me. Physical copies I'd kept in a folder in my filing cabinet because I am, at my core, the kind of person who keeps a filing cabinet. Here is what I found, working through the night. The consignee was still in my name as a grantor. That hadn't changed, meaning if the business defaulted, I was still liable. But I had no controlling interest, no decision-making power, no stake in the upside, just the risk, just the exposure. The loan I'd contributed to in 2019 had been categorized internally as a family gift rather than an investment or loan, which meant there was no paper trail requiring repayment or equity in return. My father had thanked me at the time and said we'd sort out the details later. We never did. I had let it go because it felt small and because I didn't want to be the kind of daughter who made everything transactional. And the document I had signed 8 months ago, the one my brother called a tax formality, had a clause buried on page 6, clause 11, subsection C. It waived my right to contest ownership restructuring for a period of 24 months, provided I had received written notification of changes. The written notification, I would later discover, had been sent to an email address I no longer used, an old work account from a job I'd left 3 years prior. My brother had that address. He'd emailed me at it once, maybe twice, years ago. They hadn't just planned this, they had planned it carefully. At 3 a.m., I made a list, non-angry list, a precise one. Assets, liabilities, leverage points. The lease guarantee was a liability they needed me to release, or at minimum to not exercise. If I called in the guarantee, meaning if I formally notified the bank that I was withdrawing as guarantor, which I was allowed to do with 60 days' notice, it would trigger a review of the business's credit terms. At current rates and their current revenue, they would not qualify for the same terms without me. The new office space lease renewal was coming up in 4 months. They needed continuity. They needed me to stay quiet and stay on the paperwork. There was something else. A vendor relationship that I had personally established in 2020 when the business was pivoting and my father didn't have the connections to get the account. I'd made the introduction through a former colleague. The contract was in the business's name, but the contact relationship, the person who actually picked up the phone, was with me. I had maintained that relationship for 4 years. Holiday cards, the occasional lunch when she was in town. She liked me. She trusted me. No vendor relationship, no primary supply account, no supply account, no product availability for the Q1 push my brother had been building toward for 6 months. I wasn't going to blow anything up. I was going to ask questions. Very specific, very formal, very documented questions. The retirement party had been on a Saturday. By Monday morning, I had spoken with the business attorney. She was direct in the way that good attorneys are direct, which means she didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. She told me what was accurate. The document I'd signed was probably enforceable as written. The family gift categorization of my 2019 contribution was going to be hard to contest without a contemporaneous paper trail. But the lease guarantee situation was clean. I had clear rights there. And the email notification issue, sending to a defunct address, was worth examining. "Don't do anything yet," she said. "Let me pull the full picture." I didn't do anything. For 1 week, I did nothing except go to work, come home, and wait. My brother called on Wednesday. He wanted to have lunch. "Catch up," he said. "It's been a while." It had been exactly 11 days since the retirement party, where we had hugged in the parking lot, and he had said he was proud of how well I was doing. "Sure," I said. "Saturday works." At lunch he was warm. He asked about my job, my apartment, whether I was seeing anyone. He talked about the business with this new energy, this forward-leaning optimism that I recognized as the version of him that appeared when something was going to plan. He mentioned almost in passing that they'd be renewing the office lease soon, and it would be great to have everything settled and the family aligned. I asked what he meant by aligned. He smiled. He said, everyone on the same page. Dad's stepping back, I'm taking the lead. We just want to make sure the transition is smooth. I nodded. I said that made sense. I said I'd been meaning to review some of the paperwork anyway and I'd be in touch. He said, of course, no rush. There was rush. We both knew it. The lease renewal window opened in 6 weeks. The following Tuesday, my attorney finished her review. The email notification issue was meaningful. She believed it was sufficient grounds to challenge the enforceability of Clause 11C, particularly given that I had not actively been using that address and there was no evidence I had received or read the notification. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was leverage, real leverage. More importantly, she confirmed what I already knew about the lease guarantee. I could withdraw, 60 days written notice, clean. I sent the letter on a Thursday morning, certified mail to the bank, CC'd to my father and brother via email, formal and plain and correct. By noon, my brother had called 3 times. I let it go to voicemail each time. His messages went from curious to concerned to something that was trying very hard to sound calm and not quite managing it. My father called at 1:15. I answered. "Ellie," he said, and his voice had that particular texture it got when he was trying to sound reasonable and was actually frightened. "What is this about?" "I'm reviewing my financial exposure," I said. "My attorney advised me to formalize my position on the guarantee. It's a standard protective step." "Your attorney?" A pause. "You got an attorney?" "Dad," I said, "I co-signed a lease for a business I no longer have a stake in. That's a real liability. You understand why I have to address that." Silence. "We should talk," he said, "in person." "I'm available next week," I said. The supply vendor called me on Friday. Not the business. Me. My cell phone. My contact, calling to check in the way she sometimes did. I told her carefully that there had been some ownership changes at the business and I wanted to make sure she was aware before the Q1 cycle started. I told her I would not be in a decision-making capacity going forward. I told her I just wanted to flag it so she wasn't caught off guard by any changes in communication. She thanked me. She said she appreciated the heads up. She said she'd need to go through her company's standard re-verification process for any account with an ownership change, which usually took 4 to 6 weeks. The Q1 push was in 7 weeks. On Monday, my brother showed up at my apartment. Not called, not texted. Showed up. He had his laptop bag over one shoulder, and the look of someone who had rehearsed something in the car and was now trying to remember it. I let him in. I made coffee. I sat across from him at my kitchen table and waited. "This isn't what you think," he started. "Tell me what it is," I said. He talked for 20 minutes. Some of it was about efficiency, about how one clear owner was better for the business, about how Dad had always intended for him to take the lead because he was the one who'd been working inside the business every day while I had my own career. Some of it was about how my contribution in 2019 was appreciated, but had always been understood as a gift. Some of it was about how he had assumed I didn't want the operational responsibility. He had never asked me, not once. He had assumed, which was easier than asking because asking would have required him to share. I never said I wanted to run the business, I said when he finished, but I also never agreed to be erased from it. He looked at me. The document was sent to an email I haven't used in 3 years. He didn't say anything. "I'm not trying to blow this up," I said, and I meant it. I had no interest in watching my father's 40-year business collapse. I had no interest in a lawsuit. I had no interest in making this a war. I want a fair exit. "A buyout?" he said slowly. "At current valuation," I said, "which my attorney has calculated independently. And I want the lease guarantee formally transferred to you, so I'm off the paperwork completely, and I want it done before the renewal window closes." He was quiet for a long time. "And if we don't?" he asked, not aggressive, just asking. "Then I continue exercising my rights as I see them," I said, "and the audit process my attorney has initiated continues." He left 2 hours later. He hadn't agreed to anything, but he also hadn't said no. My father came to my apartment 4 days later. Just him. He sat on my couch and for a moment he looked genuinely old in a way I hadn't noticed at the party, and I felt a flicker of something soft toward him before I remembered the folder Janet had laid on the conference table. "I didn't think you'd find out," he said. "Not a justification, just a fact." "I know," I said. "It wasn't personal, Ellie." I looked at him for a moment. "It was entirely personal, Dad. I'm your daughter." He flinched, just slightly. "You contributed so much," he said. "We just didn't want you to feel burdened anymore." It was such a perfect piece of self-deception that I almost admired it. The story they had told themselves was that they were doing me a favor, relieving me of responsibility, freeing me, and in that story, the fact that they had also taken the asset and left the liability was just a detail, a side effect, not the point. I want the buyout, I said. That's all. I don't want to fight. I want a clean exit. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to your brother. I know you will, I said. Before he left, I stopped him. I said, the woman who made this possible, Janet, she took a real risk to show me what she showed me. I need you to know that her job is untouchable. That's non-negotiable. Whatever happens, she keeps her position, her salary, and her standing. My father looked at me for a moment. Janet gave you the documents. Janet cared about doing the right thing, I said, which is more than I can say for the people who put together those documents. He didn't respond. He left. 2 weeks later, the settlement meeting was scheduled. My attorney's office, conference room with a window that looked out onto the street, my father, my brother, their attorney, my attorney, and me. My brother had a counteroffer prepared. Lower valuation, slower timeline, conditions attached about not discussing the matter with other family members or business associates. I let my attorney speak first. She laid out the case clearly and without drama. The email notification issue, the lease exposure, the vendor relationship, and the re-verification timeline that was currently running, the independent valuation figure, the fact that the audit process, once initiated, could not be quietly withdrawn, it would simply proceed on its own schedule. My brother's attorney made 2 more attempts at revision. My attorney responded to both. At 2:47 in the afternoon, my brother signed the buyout agreement at my attorney's proposed number. The lease transfer paperwork was initialed. The timeline was set at 30 days. My father signed last. He used the pen slowly, like he was thinking about each letter. I didn't say anything dramatic when it was done. I didn't need to. My attorney shook my hand. My brother looked at the table. My father looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something between regret and relief. The way people look when a thing they feared has finally happened, and they realize the anticipating was worse. I walked out into the hallway. I called Janet from the elevator. It's done, I said. She exhaled, long and slow. Thank you, I said. I mean that. I know what it cost you to make that copy. You would have done the same, she said. I didn't know if that was true. I hoped it was. Your job is secure. I made that part of the conditions. She was quiet for a moment. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, I said. The funds transferred on the 28th day. I paid off the remainder of my own student loans that same afternoon, something I had been slowly chipping away at for 7 years. Then I sat on my couch for a while and did nothing. I ordered takeout. I watched something I'd been meaning to watch for months. I slept well, for the first time in weeks, without my phone, face up on the nightstand. My brother texted once 2 weeks after the settlement. It said, I hope you know this wasn't meant to hurt you. I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone down and didn't respond. Not because I was still angry. I wasn't mostly, but because some things don't need a response. Some things just need to be acknowledged in your own chest and then set down. My father called on my birthday, left a voicemail. He said happy birthday. He said he hoped I was doing well. He said he missed me. He did not say he was sorry. I hadn't expected him to. I listened to the voicemail twice, and then I called him back. We talked for 11 minutes about nothing important. The weather. A news story he'd seen. How the business was doing, which he mentioned carefully, testing whether I would flinch. I didn't flinch. It wasn't my business anymore. I had made my peace with that. What I hadn't expected was how much lighter I would feel. Not because the money changed everything. It helped, but it wasn't the point. It was that I had stopped holding something up that was quietly crushing me, and I hadn't even known how heavy it was until I put it down. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being the person everyone counts on. It feels like strength for a long time. It looks like strength from the outside. But there's a version of it that's really just fear. Fear of what happens if we stop. Fear of being the one who let things fall. Fear of asking for what you've earned, because asking might break the story everyone has agreed to tell about who you are in the family. I was Ellie, the responsible one, the one who showed up. I'm still those things. But I'm also the one who walked into a settlement meeting with documentation and a calm voice and left with what I was owed. Janet sends me a text every few weeks, just small things, a funny article, a update about her daughter's soccer team. Last month, she sent me a photo of the office after they repainted it. It looked nice. I told her so. I don't fund other people's retirements anymore. I don't co-sign things out of love without understanding what I'm signing. I don't let "we'll sort out the details later" be the end of a conversation. I'm still the one who shows up, but now when I show up, I know exactly where I stand, and I make sure it's in writing. The thing I keep coming back to is the folder. Janet said it on that conference table without dramatics, without a speech. Just here. Look. She had made a copy of documents she was asked to file and said nothing for days, carrying that weight alone, waiting until she was sure. That kind of quiet courage is rarer than people realize. It would have been so much easier for her to file the papers, go home, and tell herself it wasn't her business. Most people do exactly that. Janet didn't, and because she didn't, I had a chance to see clearly before it was too late. I thought a lot about what made the difference in how this ended. It wasn't anger. I had plenty of that, but anger alone doesn't build a case. It wasn't luck. It was that I sat down at 3 a.m. with every document I had ever signed, and I read them. All of them. I used the part of myself that knew how to think precisely under pressure, the part I'd spent years developing at work, the part my family had always benefited from but never fully reckoned with. That clarity, the willingness to understand the actual situation rather than the one I wished existed, was the only thing that gave me real options. Because here's what I've learned about being taken advantage of by people who love you, or say they do. It usually doesn't happen through cruelty. It happens through assumption. My brother assumed I wouldn't look closely. My father assumed I'd stay quiet to keep the peace. They weren't entirely wrong about who I had been. I had spent years making myself convenient, making myself easy, letting "will sort it out later" be a complete sentence. That wasn't virtue. It was avoidance dressed up as generosity. Real integrity, I think, means knowing what you've contributed and being willing to stand behind it. Not out of greed, but out of honesty. To say, this is what happened, this is what I'm owed, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make everyone comfortable. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. It wasn't even the settlement meeting. It was calling my father back on my birthday and talking to him for 11 minutes about nothing, knowing that an apology wasn't coming and deciding to stay in relationship with him anyway on my own terms. That took something different than smarts. It took a kind of steadiness I had to build deliberately, the ability to hold both things at once, what he did and who he still is to me, and the fact that I don't have to collapse those two things into one verdict. I don't think my father is a bad person. I think he made choices that were convenient and told himself a story that made those choices feel okay. Most people do that at some point. What I know now is that I don't have to participate in someone else's story about me, even someone I love. I get to know my own value. I get to document it. I get to walk into a room and speak clearly about it without apologizing. Janet texts me every few weeks. Small things. I always write back. Some debts you don't repay with money. You repay them by not forgetting. By saying, out loud and on record, you mattered in this story. What you did mattered. I'm still the one who shows up. That hasn't changed. But I show up differently now, with my eyes open and my paperwork in order.